Morytania is a truly depressing place. It looks incredibly ugly and all its inhabitants either hate you or your food or their lives. But adding to its aura of misery and hopelessness is an even more depressing history that saw this place go from natural wonder to flourishing kingdom before its sudden downfall into a pit of despair infamous for dispensing nothing but horror and torment for thousands of years. Yet beneath the near-opaque cloud of oppression covering Gielinor's eastern peninsula, something rather unexpected can be found if you look hard enough: the faintest spark of hope. Today, I'm taking you through the history of one of RuneScape's most foreboding regions. Please ensure your gold helmet is solidly secured, because we're about to launch right into the origins of the area for the game's most iconic video series, one of my favorite ever RuneScape storylines, as well as in my opinion the new best OSRS quest of all time. This video is about the full history of Morytania and will act as a short prelude to the next one, which will be on the entire Myreque quest series. I am really excited for this one. Early history. We don't know much of what happened in Morytania during the early years of Gielinor, but it probably got its first inhabitants during the First Age, including some humans. It's unknown what the name of the region was at this early stage of its existence, but it looked absolutely nothing like its modern stinky evolution. What's today the Morytania swamp was back then a massive, luscious, fertile, and beautiful forest known as Humblethorn. Its story becomes easier to document in the Second Age, during which many gods descended on Gielinor to spread their influence while Guthix was asleep. This is when Saradomin first made his appearance in this land along with some of his followers, which included a race called the Icians. Icians are large winged humanoids with an innate affinity for light and magic. They are deadly opponents in battle, but are today almost completely extinct. Under the leadership of their queen, Efarite Hallow, and with the guidance of Saradomin, they established a realm on the eastern edge of the mainland, the Kingdom of Hallowvale, whose capital of the same name was located where Myreque now stands. They tolerated the humans already settled there, but made them second-class citizens. Systemic classism notwithstanding, the kingdom became one of the greatest realms in the world. The Icians went above and beyond to make it a place of beauty. The pristine vegetation of Humblethorn and its rivers became the neighbors of cities made in the iconic Ician style of white and blue stones, of which the only glimpse that remains now is buried in the ancient hallowed sepulchre. However, the citizens of Hallowvale used to live in a place that they claim always followed the sun closely, and so on Gielinor they missed the constant soothing presence of the bright light. To remedy this, they erected an immense lighthouse that covered most of their realm in light as a sort of makeshift sun of their own creation. Hallowvale shared most of its borders with modern-day Morytania, except for a small corner in the northwest that was under the control of the god Zaros. He had the fortress of Carild built near today's Canifis to fortify his foothold east of the River Salve. But as far as we know, the Zarosian Empire and Hallowvale were never hostile enough to wage war on one another at the time. However, the winds of change were about to blow, and their gust would not leave Hallowvale unscathed. The Third Age. The Second Age concluded when Zaros was betrayed by his general Zamorak, ushering in the Third Age and sparking the infamous God Wars. We're gonna stick only to what's relevant for Morytania here, but there's a 1.5-hour Third Age documentary on this channel if you're interested in the wider God Wars. A common theme of the era is that the main warring gods, Saradomin and Zamorak, hated their common enemy Zaros far more than they hated each other, and were thus willing to repeatedly form temporary alliances of convenience to strike harder at what was left of the ruinous powers. During the early years of the Third Age, Zamorakians attacked the fortress of Carild and completely destroyed it, eliminating the only pocket not in Saradominist control in the region, although there's little to suggest Hallowvale attempted to settle the fortress's remains. Perhaps they were happy to leave a demilitarized zone between them and their enemies. This did little to help them though, as sometime later, the kingdom was invaded by Zamorakian forces led by Lowerniel Drakan. Lowerniel was undoubtedly the most powerful individual of his kind, having forcibly united all vampires under his leadership back when they lived in their homeworld of Vampirium. They would later be visited by Zaros, who guided their society into a much more organized civilization and brought them to Gielinor to use as his soldiers. Lowerniel was a ruthless commander with high tolerance for friendly casualties. While he and his brethren were blessed with natural immunities to most weapons and harm, one of their key weaknesses was light magic, which the Icians had a gift for. Furthermore, their queen Efarite had a well-known passion for creating and growing unusual vegetation. It was soon discovered that one of her most beloved botanical experiments, the blisterwood tree, was uniquely dangerous to vampires. Even once cut, its wood was known to twist and turn unpredictably, which allowed weapons made out of it to mess with the vampire's innate reflexes like a shape-shifting fly swatter. On top of this unusual attribute, the tree sap was also poisonous to the invaders. All of this is to say that the invasion was not exactly a walk in the park, yet Lowerniel still ordered unrelenting assaults across the front line, leading to massive casualties among both sides. Despite the mountains of vampiric corpses, the Zamorakians still managed to overwhelm Hallowvale's defenders, until what was left of them was forced to retreat behind the walls of their capital, leading to a siege of the city. Lowerniel would no doubt have been willing to see his own kind decimated in an assault on the fortified position, but even he was forced to recognize that too few of his troops remained for such an attempt to succeed. While displeased by the situation, he ordered the siege to continue. Some of his closest allies had a plan in mind, however. His brother, Ranis Drakan, and the head of the vampiric family bearing her name, Verzik Vita, together captured and tortured a justiciar, i.e. an elite Saradominist knight handpicked by the deity himself. The prisoner eventually broke and revealed the location of a secret passage leading to the queen's castle, through which they managed to kidnap King Acertes Hallow, Efarite's human husband. With no hope in sight, the queen surrendered her kingdom to Lowerniel in exchange for sparing her spouse. Hallowvale was handed over to the vampires, and a tomb dedicated to her was built in the Ician graveyard, implying her usurper had her killed during her captivity. To refill his depleted ranks, Lowerniel forced many humans of the realm to undergo vampirification, a process that erased their minds and turned them into lesser vampires, although they could grow much stronger over time than their newly turned forms. A justiciar called Fozani renounced her allegiance to Saradomin to save her own skin, and to prove her allegiance to Lowerniel and Zamorak, she founded the Sisterhood, a previously Saradominist order that would henceforth be dedicated to the god of chaos. The members who refused to forsake Saradomin were either killed or became blood tithes for the vampires. The Sisterhood was granted a patch of land north of the capital that became the Village of Sleep, where they began digging deep tunnels that eventually became the Sisterhood Sanctuary. The kingdom's Icians eventually went extinct, although how they all perished and how long it took is unknown. As for Hallowvale's humans, they were all herded into the capital city. It was renamed to Myreque, split into several sectors, and the vampires imposed a system whereby one sector at a time would be designated for blood tithing to prevent their new slaves from dying too easily from the constant draining of their life force. Finally, Darkmeyer was built as the new capital city of the vampires, and Lowerniel granted the queen's old castle to Verzik Vita to reward her for her contribution in bringing Hallowvale to its knees. He declared himself the lord of the new kingdom of Morytania. The wider Saradominist world was shocked and outraged by the fall of Hallowvale. Not long after, a mysterious stranger appeared before 6 Misthalin brothers, offering them the means to reclaim the realm in the name of Saradomin in exchange for their servitude to the stranger's master. The brothers accepted, and together they raised and led an army that embarked on a Saradominist crusade to kick the evil creatures out of the east. They managed to get all the way to the walls of Myreque, the brothers seemingly invincible in battle, but the mysterious stranger returned and reminded them of the deal they had made, after which their battlefield prowess took a downwards turn. The Crusaders were ambushed during the night, and while the enemy was driven away from their camp, by the next morning all 6 brothers had perished from wounds sustained during the surprise attack. Unable to fulfill their mission, the Saradominists buried their deceased leaders in these 6 iconic barrows and retreated all the way across the south. The world had resigned itself to the grim reality that this once glorious kingdom of light and beauty was now a land of evil and misery. Over time, some unknown evil magic of the vampires turned Humble Thorn and its surrounding areas into the rotten marshes and dying woods they look like today, and Hallowvale became nothing more than a forgotten memory of a bygone age. The Fourth Age. The first half of the Fourth Age was relatively uneventful in Morytania, but that all changed around the turn of its 12th century. Sometime around the year 1100 of the Fourth Age, Lord Loreniel Draken decided his realm was now sufficiently consolidated, and what it needed now was an increase in size. If you've ever glanced at a map of Gielinor, it should be obvious to you that the only realistic way to go from Morytania was west, and so 1,000 years of relative peace in the area was broken when vampires and werewolves crossed the River Salve in an attempt to subjugate the nearby human settlements. The Myrequian armies tried to repel the invasion, only to be easily beaten back by the superior natural strength of their foes. As the threat of defeat loomed over humanity, one of its most powerful organizations decided to intervene: the Temple Knights. In case you don't know, the Temple Knights were founded by Saradomin to act as the protectors of its first temple on Gielinor, although over time it evolved into a group of elite agents specialized in intelligence gathering, spying, and carrying out the will of Saradomin from the shadows. Fearing the imminent fall of Varrock and the dangers for humanity that would result should the vampires secure access to the human realms, the Temple Knights tasked 7 of their best agents with the defense of the Silvaria Pass, the best natural line of defense standing between Loreniel's armies and humanity. Thus, Iriandol Caeslin, Sarl Dunegun, Derigol Templeton, Erisael the Pious, Friar Twiblick, Esiendar Gar, and Ivandis Sirges set out eastwards to carry out their crucial mission. Aided by the Knights, the Varrockian troops managed to stabilize the front line before it was too late. Although it's never explicitly stated, I would theorize that maybe the 7 agents, who would later become known as the 7 priestly warriors, may have brought valuable information about the enemies with them, perhaps telling the Varrockians to use silver weaponry, for example. Whatever the case, the Misthalin-Morytania War entered a protracted state of relative stalemate. For decades, the foes of Morytania were unable to break out of the narrow Silvaria Pass, while the Misthalin warriors were just as unsuccessful in pushing them beyond the Salve River. Eventually, around the year 1200, the human armies launched a final assault through the mountain pass to eliminate their enemies once and for all. During the battle, the Temple Knights performed an advanced ritual that imbued the waters of the Salve with a powerful blessing from Saradomin. From that point on, any evil creature that tried crossing the river found itself severely weakened if they even survived the attempt, all but severing any hopes the invaders had of receiving further reinforcements. The 7 priestly warriors, now much older and battle-weary than ever, still fought in the vanguard even after the completion of their ritual, and all of them ultimately gave their life to rid Misthalin of the last remnants of Morytanian evil in the final battle of the war, right on the western bank of the Salve. A massive temple was built right where they fell, in an area now known as Paterdomus, along with an underground crypt where their remains were housed as holy relics, symbolizing humanity's triumph against the Zamorakian monsters from the east and the indispensable role the Holy Knights had in it. A few events happened at unknown dates, but sometime after the Misthalin-Morytania War, Loreniel banished his own brother, Draenor Draken, from Morytania. The reason is unknown, although we are told that the self-proclaimed Count Draenor was considered weak and overly obsessed with pointless titles, so perhaps that had something to do with it. He and his servant Trontun would settle on the western edge of Misthalin and built Draenor Manor. The small Draenor village would later be founded nearby, its inhabitants living in constant fear of their vampiric oppressor, although the Count was now much weaker after being forced across the Salve River. It's extremely rare that a human manages to rise in Morytanian society, so it's also worth talking about Karos. Karos was officially a Morytanian diplomat, and unofficially a spy of all trades who could talk his way into anything under the sun. His charisma was nothing short of legendary, which is how this human born in the slums of Morytania managed to rise high enough to attract the attention of Lowerniel himself. On top of his innate charm, Karos found a way to enhance his social abilities by creating his eponymous Ring of Karos. This magical piece of jewelry expanded the wearer's skills of persuasion and charisma, which made its creator able to wrap most people around his finger with nothing but words. Karos commissioned the construction of a castle that would act as his home and base of operations in service of Lord Draken. Considering how difficult it is to find good lodging in Morytania at the best of times, the fact that this man had the level of influence and usefulness to convince one of the most cutthroat and tyrannical rulers out there that he should get his own castle makes Karos all the more noteworthy. However, eventually he vanished and his fate has been lost to history. Only rumors offer us a possible explanation, with the wise old man claiming that he's heard people say that the man grew overconfident in his abilities and tried to use them on his own master, which he believes would have certainly failed and cut short his remarkable career. Another event of note was the discovery of a patch of land near the southwestern corner of Lowerniel's domain that was incredibly abundant in precious metals. Legions of miners were quickly dispatched, no doubt mostly composed of human slaves, to exploit these natural resources. Every new digging revealed new layers of value, and the mine quickly became one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the world. As it continued expanding, the workers found their rarest material yet, but one that would turn out to be very unwelcome for the vampires. It was discovered that some of the salve's water had been seeping into a deep cave under the mine, leading to its evil-repelling blessing imbuing the very soil and forming crystals that were as deadly to the Morytanian creatures as the river itself. Once the news reached Lowerniel's ear, he ordered the immediate decommissioning of the mine. The sprawling network of caves and tunnels became abandoned overnight, and Lord Draken imprisoned one of his own followers into the lower levels of the mine to guard the salve crystals, Traius Deith. Almost nothing is known about him, but his soul still haunts the mine, deterring explorers from venturing too deep and killing those too bold, curious, or stupid to turn back. The last major event of the Fourth Age happened around its year 1777. Weirdly specific, I know. The memories of the last conflict with Morytania were now over half a millennium old and had mostly faded from humanity's consciousness. Indeed, no evil had been spotted in the East for generations, and everyday life was often disrupted by hostile creatures such as goblins and giants. The contemporary humans figured Morytania couldn't be that much more dangerous, and for the first time in a few dozen generations, human explorers crossed the River Salve in search of new lands to settle. Several simultaneous expeditions headed in different directions, leading to the foundation of at least 3 settlements of note. A first group discovered the abandoned remains of Karos's castle. They occupied its empty halls, and soon the community around it had grown enough in population and organization to declare the birth of a new independent realm, the Lordship of the North Coast. The long-lost Ring of Karos would eventually be rediscovered there, and once the power it contained became evident, it would end up in the hands of the castle's new lord and subsequently passed down from heir to heir. The ring had a rather useful effect on werewolves, making them believe they smelled their own kin in human disguises rather than actual men, which allowed the settlers to avoid attracting unwanted attention from the beasts. A second group of explorers ventured even deeper east until they reached the coast. There they founded Port Phasmatis, a settlement that began trading with overseas merchants from the eastern lands, also known as the Wushanko Isles. However, the existence of a human port did not escape Lowerniel Draken's notice for long. Vampires descended on the small colony and ordered its inhabitants to pay blood tithes to be allowed in the kingdom. With the vampires holding all the cards, Port Phasmatis was forced to accept the demands. The town's prosperity began dwindling, and many left or made preparations to do so. But one day, a powerful mage from the eastern lands arrived at the port. The foreigner, who would become known as the Necrovarus, told the locals of a hidden source of power buried near the town, assuring them that he could use it to protect the port from its vampiric neighbors. The excavations revealed a pool of ectoplasm, on top of which the necrovirus had the ectofuntus built to channel the slime's power. The plan worked, as he was able to create a barrier around the town that Lowenjel's minions could not break through. Yet the necrovirus had some less than benevolent intentions in mind all along. While his magic did protect Port Phasmattis from the vampires, it also made the population slowly wither until they all died one by one. However, it also made it impossible for them to transcend to the afterlife, forcing them to linger in the world of the living as ghosts. The necrovirus effectively took over the town, and even the vampires began leaving it alone, since even if they were to destroy the barrier, there would be no blood to be found there anymore. Finally, a third group of human settlers went south rather than east, and set up camp in an area that would become Morton. The town became famous for its vast natural underground caves, which they began using as catacombs when they developed unique burial and cremation rituals. Unfortunately for the village, it was discovered by the vampires at an unknown date, and you guessed it, was forced to pay blood tithes to survive afterwards. Modern history. We are now entering the 5th age. Although the next event or two may have happened at the tail end of the previous one, the timeline is a little uncertain. Remember the Lordship of the North Coast? I hope so, because that was just a handful of paragraphs ago. But after a few hundred years of independence, Lowenjeldraken finally became aware of its existence. Its citizens must have refused to pay the obligatory blood tithes, as the vampires surrounded the humans until they were all forced to take shelter inside Karos's old castle. Rologarth, the then Lord of the North Coast, began selling some of his subjects to their enemies in an attempt to please them. A course of action that was recommended to him by his physician, Dr. Fenkenstrain. This utterly failed to placate the enemy, and one by one the remaining citizens began dying under suspicious circumstances until only the doctor remained to occupy the empty castle. He took the Ring of Karos from his former liege, protecting him from the nearby werewolves, and renamed this prime piece of real estate to Fenkenstrain's castle. The proud lordship of the North Coast was no more, and it would not be the last human settlement east of the south to collapse either. At some point, an unknown mist formed in the Sanguinesti region. It rose and floated to Morton, and when its inhabitants were exposed, they began developing odd medical symptoms. It did not take long for the villagers to start looking quite ill and walking around aimlessly in a state of apparent mindlessness. They are now known as the Afflicted, and the very same cursed mist raised the remains that were laid to rest in the underground caves, causing them to roam and become hostile to the living. The formation of the mist seems to have been either an accident or a well-kept secret in Darkmeyer, as the vampires returned to Morton to collect their usual blood tithes, only to find the village had become dilapidated and the blood of its citizens had turned foul. After this event, the town was abandoned and left to its fate. Finally, not so many years ago, something unusual began happening around Morytania. For the first time, its suppressed humans would sometimes start witnessing acts of organized resistance against the vampires. Some men would appear, strike at the Morytanian authorities in some way, and vanish before they could be stopped. Rumors spread quickly that a new hope was blooming in Morytania, and the populace began referring to this new underground resistance movement as the Myreque, a name meaning hidden in mire, which the rebels readily adopted themselves. The guerrilla group has become famous in the region, although Morytania's humans are careful not to utter their name when in earshot of the vampires, who do not take kindly to these unprecedented acts of resistance against their previously unchallenged rule over these lands. And at long last, we wrap up this history of Morytania with a very recent event that may prove pivotal for Morytania's future, yet it does not take place in Sanguinesti, nor in the vast Stygian swamps. It happens somewhere else entirely, some ways west of the Salve River. In the year 169 of the 5th Age, an unremarkable human leaves their previous life behind, and inside the courtyard of Lumbridge Castle, decides to become an adventurer. Only time will tell how this single individual of unrecorded body type might affect the course of Gielinor's eastern peninsula. And by that, I mean we will find out in the next video, which will tell the complete tale of the Myreque quest series and examine its fascinating lore. So be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to learn more about one of RuneScape's best and darkest storylines, and how some of the events we discussed today might in fact be more complicated than they seem. As always, thank you so much for watching. It's good to be back after having a forced break due to moving. If you'd like to help support the work I do, the simplest way is to like, comment and share the video. It does in fact go a long way to help spread the underappreciated lore of OSRS. If you want to go above and beyond, you can also become a channel member like these glorious patrons of the lore right here, which gives you access to regular behind-the-scene update posts as a way to thank you for helping me put together these big projects. But regardless, thank you again for watching. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the story speedrun part 2. We'll be getting back to that right after this little tangent. I'll see you next time.